you have the call.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Tasmania has become one of the most inspirational eco-destinations in the world. It is world famous for its wilderness landscapes and the diversity of its wildlife, having 19 national parks and reserves covering 45% of the state. Around half of this area is located in the Tasmanian wilderness, a World Heritage Site and one of the last expanses of temperate wilderness in the world, which includes the Cradle Mountain Lake Sinclair National Park, home of the famous overland track, and the Franklin Gordon Wild Rivers National Park. Tonight I'd like to focus on this last national park. The pristine waters of the Franklin River flow from the snowy highlands in central Tasmania, through lowland forests and a string of gorges, and then through Macquarie Harbour to the Southern Ocean. For those of you who have not been there, the Franklin River is a truly wild place. Its water is crystal clear and it's abundant with wildlife. There are no roads, hotels, farms or factories on its banks. Next year marks the 30th anniversary of the Franklin River blockade and the 30th anniversary of the World Heritage Listing. Without the blockade, the World Heritage Listing and a change in Australian federal government, one of the world's most spectacular river basins would have been destroyed forever. Respected US adventure magazine Outdoor recently named the Franklin River as #1 of its top 10 river journeys in the world. In 1982, this spectacular and wild river was put under serious threat when work began on the first of 4 dams which would flood the Franklin River to harness the energy of the water for hydroelectricity. In his role as director of the Tasmanian Wilderness Society, Dr Bob Brown, in mid-1982 at a press conference, announced that the group would mount a peaceful protest to defend the wild and spectacular Franklin. The Franklin blockade began on the 14th of December 1982, and at the same time in Paris, the World Heritage Committee walked past a large group of peaceful protesters holding banners saying, "Save the Franklin." The World Heritage Committee eventually voted to list Tasmania's wilderness and wild rivers, including the Franklin, in the Register for World Heritage Properties. Back in Tasmania, the stakes were high and the odds were against protesters who were sitting peacefully in cruise boats and red and yellow rubber rafts. They formed a chain of small boats across the Gordon River to prevent or block barges carrying bulldozers and other heavy machinery from reaching the proposed site of dam construction. 50 people were arrested on the first day, and in the following 6 weeks a total of 1,300 people were arrested. Many went to jail. Throughout the campaign, weekend workshops were held at the Liffey Baptist Youth Camp, where blockaders learned the theory of peaceful protest and did role plays and practiced techniques on how to prevent violence and deal with potentially angry workers, police or politicians. There was a lot of fear amongst the blockaders, campaigners and organisers, as almost none of the approximate total of 6,000 people who came to Strawn to defend the Franklin River, let alone the 1,300 who were arrested, had ever been in trouble with the law previously. At the time, they didn't know that their non-violent strategy, which they had learned from the Quakers and from Thoreau, Gandhi and Martin Luther King, was soon going to stop the dam and protect the wild Franklin River from its destruction for future generations of Tasmanians, us and our children, and for visitors across the globe. As this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Franklin River blockade, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the many people involved in the campaign. It's impossible to acknowledge everyone by name, but I'd like to acknowledge at least some of the key people, starting with Bob Brown, who spearheaded the campaign, Judy Mahan, who coordinated and looked after the business side of things, Karen Alexander, who engaged and recruited people on the mainland, Lilith Ward and Catherine Plowman, who were key blockade organisers, Denny Hamill, who captained the old tourist boat, the J. Lee, who brought people up and down the river, Reg Morrison, who owned the boat, Ian Cohen, who came from northern New South Wales and was police liaison for the entire campaign, Mary Forage, a brave local who gave a bed and shelter to many, Harry McDermott, the local mayor who stood his ground to protect the river and local tourism industry, and lastly Bob Hawke, who, without the change in government, as well as World Heritage Listing, the Franklin River would never have been saved. I'd particularly like to thank the 6,000 peaceful protesters who came from across the globe to protect the Franklin and the 1,300 people who put their lives on hold and who were arrested during this campaign. Although they were breaking the law of the day, it's interesting to reflect that in 2008, for the 25th anniversary of the blockade, campaigners came together for a big party in Tasmania and were joined in merriment by some of the police and dignitaries who had not only opposed them, but who had actually arrested them. Many laughs were heard about old times that night. No one was in doubt that the outcome was a good one for Tasmania. I thank all the protectors, and so should all Tasmanians. Why? Conservationists are often labelled economic vandals in my state. The truth is, given time to reflect on history, they are quite the opposite. They have turned out to be state builders. They have delivered positive, sustainable, structural change to the economy of my home state. With all the doom and gloom currently surrounding Tasmania's economy, our wild places and the tourism they attract is one bright light in the economy. Our protected, wild and rare World Heritage Areas are critical to our Tasmanian economy and future prosperity. A report to the Department of Environment, Water, Heritage and the Arts in 2008 confirmed this. Tasmania's World Heritage Areas, not tourism in total, just the World Heritage Areas, are estimated to contribute $721 million in annual direct and indirect state output or business turnover. And it's worth noting, if this figure is accurate, that's approximately half of the entire tourism spend in Tasmania, which is $1.56 billion in the last financial year. $313 million in annual direct and indirect state value added, $208 million in direct and indirect state household income, and creating 5,372 direct and indirect jobs. Compare this to the forestry industry in Tasmania, which currently sits at around 3,400 employees employed, and I would like to state that no one's job in any particular industry is more valuable than anyone else's, but it does give you an interesting comparison in the conservation versus extraction debate in Tasmania, and it certainly reflects on the transition underway in our economy. Nearly 900,000 tourists visited Tasmania last year. A recent Legislative Council report in Tasmania confirmed that our iconic wild areas are the important tourism drawcards. Several respected studies, including by Tourism Tasmania, have also highlighted the value of nature-based tourism to our state. That is, tourism that is dependent on natural attributes, particularly those of national parks and wild areas. Tourism Tasmania stated in their report, Motivation Triggers, Appeal Research and Motivations for Tourism in Tasmania, and they noted Tasmania's natural assets, its wilderness and coastal experiences, have the strongest emotional associations, the strongest appeal rankings, and are the most potent motivators to shift travel intentions to bring people to Tasmania. Tasmania's wilderness is the key point of difference for our state to the rest of the country and represents to many potential visitors an opportunity to explore in peace and solitude. Other reports have also found that nature-based tourism far outweighs other drawcards as a reason to visit Tasmania, including food, wine, history and heritage. Tourism, driven by our World Heritage Areas, is a great ambassador for Tasmania. A strong tourism industry is not just one that emphasises our national splendour, but it also our small-scale, high-quality food and wine producers and the great interest of our cultural and historic attractions. Recent studies of business clusters, a critical mass of linked industries and institutions in one geographical location, suggest that cottage, artisan, hospitality, food and beverage and other service industries can flourish around popular iconic tourism destinations. Linking all these three elements together in Tasmania is our crucially important brand. Many would argue that Tasmania's rare wild areas are our state's brand. If not entirely, then they are certainly its beating heart. I feel that many Tasmanians take our World Heritage Areas for granted and assume they have always existed, especially younger Tasmanians such as my children. But the truth is, they have been hard fought and won for by the courage of many conservationists over a long period of time. While taking the time tonight to acknowledge the 30th anniversary of the Franklin and the World Heritage listing, and I must point out that it's a very opportune time to do this given the very real potential under the intergovernmental agreement currently before the upper house in Tasmania's parliament to put another 130,000 hectares of World Heritage value forest into a listing. While acknowledging this and the economic importance to our state, it was interesting to see comparisons to the present day when it comes to the campaign to protect our Tarkine, another area that we hope will soon be put up for a heritage listing. Thinking back to the Franklin, the Tasmanian Premier at the time was Liberal Robin Gray, and at a rally held in Queenstown during the campaign, he put on a set of boxing gloves to show his intentions to the Wilderness Society and members of the community committed to defending the pristine and wild Franklin River. Premier Gray described the Franklin as a brown, leech-ridden ditch. During this time, big business, the unions and the Hydroelectric Commission, and consequently the Liberal and Labor parties, ran a remarkable campaign, which is strangely familiar. They tried to convince Tasmanians that the dam was essential to their future well-being. The campaign ran on the slogan of jobs, jobs, jobs. Letters were circulated to workers warning them that their future was at stake, and people were told that the dam was vital for the state's economic future. The media and community campaign was ratcheted up against conservationists. This scaremongering is being repeated in Tasmania today, and people are being told that without mining in the Tarkine, their future is doomed. This was a message of a recent rally organised by Paul Howes from the AWU, but Tasmanians have heard all of this before. One thing the rally did correctly highlight was the sorry state of the economy in northwest Tasmania, especially in areas such as Circular Head and Corinna. Looking at the latest tourism visitor statistics for the towns around the Tarkine region in northwest Tassie, the tourism visitations are just 10% of the iconic areas in Tasmania, such as Freycinet, Port Arthur or Cradle Mountain. There is so much potential to develop the Tarkine itself into an iconic destination in the northwest of Tasmania, an area that desperately needs a new, diversified economic vision. The Greens feel this vision is threatened by proposals to explore and mine across the entire Tarkine region. People have the right to exercise their democratic right to protest and voice their opinions about decisions and actions being made about the world around us, a world that we all share. After all, we all should get to have a say about what happens to the environment that sustains our collective and future existence on Earth. I'd like to finish by reading, and you'll be quite pleased that I'll be finishing early, Mr. Deputy President. A quote from Bob Brown's book, Memo for a Saner World. The strength in peaceful protest lies in bringing an issue to public attention, to appealing to people at large, so they will then in turn influence developers or politicians to alter their course. But just as foot soldiers are no match for tanks, citizens who put themselves in the path of barges or bulldozers in remote places rarely have the physical advantage, but they do have the moral advantage. The Franklin and Tasmania's valuable World Heritage areas are testimony to this fact.
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. The Senate stands adjourned and will meet again at 9:30 a.m. this morning.